We are a channel that helps you learn a new language through stories. Enjoy the video. Whispers in the Bramble. The fog was thick on the moors that night, clinging to the air like ghostly fingers, winding around rocks and brush, seeping into every corner of the ancient, crumbling landscape. Felix Lightfoot, a strapping lad known for his wild grin and roguish spirit, ventured alone along the winding path through the Bramble woods, his only company the lantern swinging at his side. He wore a leather coat, frayed and patched, and carried a thin dagger at his belt, a keepsake from some distant cousin, whose name he'd long since forgotten. Felix was no stranger to nights like these, and he certainly wasn't one to be put off by a bit of fog. In fact, he welcomed it, for there was nothing he loved more than a thrill, especially if it was soaked in mystery. Villagers often said he was touched by fortune or madness, or both. A master of quick escapes, of silver-tongued lies and spry feet, he had a knack for landing on his own 2 feet no matter the danger, and he'd always walked away from even the worst of scrapes with nothing more than a cocky laugh. Yet, as the dense mist settled over the Bramble like a shroud, there was something in the air that gave Felix pause. The path twisted and turned, almost seeming to double back on itself, and he realized he'd wandered far deeper into the woods than he'd intended. The trees here were ancient things, twisted and gnarled, their boughs thick and knotted, hung with moss that dripped like old cobwebs. Every so often, he caught glimpses of something moving in the shadows, just the fleeting hint of a figure, a flicker of eyes gleaming in the darkness. He'd heard tales, of course, of spirits and curses that clung to the old forest, but he'd never put stock in such things, until now. The mist grew denser still, muffling his footsteps, and soon he could hardly see a foot in front of him. It was then, just as his grip on the lantern tightened, that he saw a light. Faint and distant, it hovered just beyond the reach of the fog, a flickering golden glow, much like his own lantern, yet somehow older, as though it had burned there since time forgotten. Curiosity, ever his bane, surged within him, and with a quick smile that masked a flicker of fear, he called out, "Who goes there, then? Another wanderer with a taste for the night?" Silence answered him. Felix took a step forward, then another, the fog swallowing him whole. His boots sank into the damp earth, and thorns scratched at his coat, tugging at him as though the Bramble itself meant to hold him back. And yet he continued, pushing past branches that seemed to clutch at him like ghostly hands, until at last, he stepped into a clearing. There, looming before him like a figure from an old dream, was the oak. Its trunk was vast and ancient, the bark twisted and scarred, with thick roots burrowing into the earth like the gnarled fingers of some buried giant. Moonlight, pale and ghostly, filtered down through the branches, casting a silvery light on the faces carved deep into the wood. Dozens of them, maybe more. Faces frozen in expressions of agony, sorrow, fear. Faces that seemed all too familiar. Felix's stomach turned as he recognized the features of his kin and friends, their eyes staring, hollow and unblinking. There was his father, who had died in a hunting accident years ago, his cousin Alistair, whom he had never gotten along with. Even Marta, the baker's daughter, who'd gone missing only a fortnight past. What in the devil's name is this?" he murmured, taking a step back. The bravado in his voice wavered, and he felt an uneasy dread coil around his heart. Then, a voice, soft, yet as deep as the roots of the earth itself, whispered from the oak. "Felix Lightfoot, lad of mischief and fortune, you stand before the tree of shadows, where bargains forgotten come to rest." The faces on the tree twisted, their eyes shifting to look at him, their mouths stretching into pained grimaces. A deep, resonant laugh echoed through the clearing, a sound that seemed to rise from the roots themselves. "You've walked paths no other dared tread, borrowed fate that was not yours to claim." Felix stumbled back, his pulse racing. His grip tightened on the lantern, but it felt heavy, useless in his hand. A memory, long buried, tugged at the edge of his mind. A deal he'd struck as a boy, in some childish act of arrogance. A promise made beneath this very tree, though he hadn't known the words then, or understood the cost. In the daring of youth, he had called upon the bramble and the shadows, had wished for luck, a charm to carry him through the toughest scrapes. He had thought it a jest, a game to fool the shadows, a way to evade the hand of fate. And for years, he had laughed his way through life, untouched by tragedy, favored by fortune in ways he had never questioned. But as the memory unfolded, he realized with horror the true cost of his charm. The faces on the tree were not merely memories, they were souls, souls claimed in his place. Each narrow escape, each twist of fate, had been paid for in blood, and each life lost had been taken in his stead. "Do you see now, Felix?" the tree whispered, its bark twisting as the faces grimaced in unison. "For every stroke of luck there is a price. The hands of fate do not bargain lightly, nor do they forget." The faces began to move, the carved eyes blinking, the mouths twisting in pain. He watched, horrified, as they mouthed silent pleas, their expressions twisted in anguish. His father, his friends, Marta, all of them had suffered for his luck, had taken his place on the edge of fate's blade. "Take it back," Felix choked, dropping his lantern as he staggered back. "Please, I'll give it all back." But the shadows only laughed, a hollow sound that echoed through the clearing. "Such gifts cannot be returned, Felix, but they may yet be reclaimed." Before he could react, he felt the roots beneath him shift, wrapping around his legs, tightening like iron chains. The bark of the oak twisted and contorted, taking on his own face. A face he hardly recognized now, twisted with fear and regret. "You will take their place as they took yours," the voice rumbled, growing deeper, more resonant. "You will pay the price for each soul lost. Fate demands it." As the roots tightened, the faces on the tree began to fade, their expressions easing as if freed from their torment. Felix struggled, but his strength was no match for the ancient magic of the bramble. The bark spread over him, hardening like stone, freezing him in place. And so, Felix Lightfoot, once the lad of endless laughter, of carefree charm, was swallowed by the ancient oak, his own face carved into the bark alongside the others, his expression forever frozen in a silent scream. The mist began to thin, the fog receding, and soon the clearing was still once more, the lantern's light flickering and fading. The tree stood silent, its roots deep, its branches heavy with the weight of the souls it had claimed. In the village, tales would be told of Felix Lightfoot and his luck, of his charm that had led him to walk paths few dared tread. They would whisper of the bramble, of the tree that watched over those who sought to cheat fate, and of the price that was paid, in time, by all who tried.